Welcome. What is the balance between government, business, and civil society? How can we achieve that balance? I'm Sarah Ritchie, and I'm a member of the League of Women Voters of Lafayette. We encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of public policy issues and to influence them through education and advocacy. Men are full members. The League of Women Voters is nonpartisan and nonprofit. Please join us. This spring, the local leagues across the United States are studying privatization of government assets and services. Our panelists today represent several types of privatization in Lafayette Parish. There are many other types in the news from the Louisiana legislature. We're hearing about school vouchers, waivers of public school regulations for charter schools, sales of prisons, and privatization of hospitals. Privatized services for Lafayette Consolidated Government include drainage cleaning of ditches, security services for LUS, the night owl and nighttime public bus runs, janitorial services for night cleaning public buildings, recycling, and speed cameras in vans. Unfortunately, we don't have time to discuss all of these services this afternoon. We are very fortunate to have today Terry Huval, Director of Lafayette Utility System, including the LUS Fiber project, Mike Newstrom, Sheriff of Lafayette Parish, and Bobby Guidry, Municipal Services Manager for Allied Waste Management. We have 4 questions for all of the panelists, and then 1 more question for Sheriff Newstrom. Here are the first set of questions. What privatized services do you contract locally? Who owns and maintains the assets? Are there subsidiaries or subcontracted providers? And Terry Huval from the LUS Fiber project, you are a government enterprise competing against the private sector. Can you tell us more from this perspective?
Okay, so we'll answer all the questions now? Or if
we could start with you, and then each of you go, and yes, all of the questions
sure,
if you
thank
don't
you
mind,
very
and
much.
I can repeat them.
Happy to be here. Thanks for the invitation. You know, from our general philosophy on how we run our utility system and our fiber system is that we use as much of the internal employee type services to provide the services that we need to provide as possible. So we basically base load ourselves with employees to get the job that needs to be done. However, there are some aspects of our work that it makes more sense for us to contract the work out. And it's mainly areas where you can expect a certain level of expertise that maybe we don't have internally, and it would be costly for us to maintain internally. Other areas could be areas where we want to have the option of being able to change the number of resources that we have helping us. And for example, we base load employees to work on all of the aspects of LUS Fiber except for the installation of services to new customers, because that number changes on sometimes a week-by-week basis. By having a contractor, we're able to get that contractor bring more resources as we need them, and to help us in that regard. And that's especially true as we are in the early phases of deployment. So we're still serving a large number of new customers every day. So having contractors on board makes more sense for us to do it that way. As time goes on and we start getting to a certain level of what our market penetration will be, then it'll operate a lot like LUS does, where most of the people that perform work for us on a day-to-day basis providing service to customers are our own employees. So that's the plan for us. In some of the more technical areas, it just makes more sense to be able to contract that out versus us having to spend the money to train our people to do that. And maybe it's a job that only requires 1 person, and then to have the backup, but I had to have a second person. By contracting it out, that way I can have the contractor be responsible for that. In all cases, we own the assets. So we're not having anyone manage our assets for us. We're just having them do labor on our behalf and under our supervision. And the last question you asked, all specific for me again, was what?
It wasn't specific for you. I was trying to introduce you as our first respondent.
Well then,
I apologize.
I think did I answer all the questions you asked me?
Absolutely.
Okay, that was my answer.
Shall I repeat the question?
Yeah, quickly.
Our first set of questions is, what privatized services do you contract locally? Who owns and maintains the assets? And are there subsidiaries or subcontracted providers?
Okay, we're kind of in a unique situation with the Sheriff's Office. We really don't contract out specialized services that we consume. What we do privatize, I guess, would be one example of certain services we provide for inmates. We're not providing it to the public, and it's not a service that we're utilizing, but I think the same would apply, and I'll try to bring it over to the prison question at the end. But the two areas that we use a contract, it's not a local contractor, is phone service for inmates, which has been in the news in the last few years because inmates, once incarcerated, they want to communicate with families and so forth. So we contract with a group out of Texas that comes in and provides the software as well as the equipment. And it's a negotiated item. It's a contractual thing. We review the contracts periodically to see if they meet our needs and the needs of the inmates. And it's worked fairly well. We get a portion of the revenue, and the company keeps a portion of the revenue. The fees and so forth that are charged are governed by the Public Service Commission, and that's where there's some controversy. There's some, in the past, has been some discussion about the higher rate of fees for inmates for telephone calls and so forth, but again, that is governed by another entity, a state commission that oversees that. The other service that we contract out for inmates is the commissary. Inmates, while they're there, we provide food and health care, medical services, but if they want extra items, for example, they want a snack, a candy bar, a soft drink, and so forth, that's all on their money, and we don't provide that. So there's a private vendor that's from out of state that also provides that. We get a portion of that. The revenue that we generate from the commissary is used only for providing services to the inmates. So we can't use that in providing, it doesn't go into the general fund. Commissary funds go into what we call inmate welfare fund, and those types of programs are utilized for the benefit of the inmates. The phone revenue is, that money goes into our general fund, and we can use use it for whatever we would like to use it for. So those are the only two examples that I could come up with. We don't really privatize out a lot of stuff. We have very small contracts with some health providers. We have a X-ray service that we use from Criley. We have a blood service that we use that we contract out with, but a very small income, and that's overseen by the people in the jail. So I'm watching my time. I'm getting kind of nervous. I'm running out of time. So that's pretty much the application in the Sheriff's Office.
Thank you. Can I get you?
Yes. Excuse me. Thank you for the invitation, because privatizing certainly was of interest to me. I experienced it 25 years ago as mayor of Scott, when the city of Scott was actually the last community in Lafayette Parish to actually privatize solid waste services. So I've been involved in it for some time. Allied Waste Services, the company I work for, provides residential, commercial, and industrial solid waste services throughout Acadiana. Over the past 25 years or so, you've come to know us as BFI, Allied Waste, or Republic Services. We're actually one in all three in one. Our legal entity is BFI Waste Services, LLC, doing business as Allied Waste Services of Acadiana, a Republic Services company. Republic Services is actually the second largest solid waste collection and disposal company in the United States. Throughout the United States, and in Acadiana in particular, municipal and parish governments have realized the benefits of creating public-private partnerships to manage solid waste. The primary influences behind the municipalities' move towards privatization are the pursuit of cost savings, given the need not to increase taxes, the ability to access new technologies while preserving capital expenditures, and the desire to reduce risks associated with providing solid waste services. For these very reasons, in the United States, over 75% of all cities privatize or contract all or part of their solid waste services. In Acadiana, the 22 parishes known as Acadiana, 92% of municipalities contract for private services for solid waste. Relative to the question who owns and maintains the assets, Allied Waste owns, operates, and maintains its own fleet of collection vehicles and equipment. I'm proud to work with a group of dedicated drivers, mechanics, and welders who work hard to provide cost-effective and efficient waste collection, recycling, and disposal services. One benefit of having support from Republic Services, a national industry leader who employs specialists and experts in solid waste systems, is that it gives Allied Waste of Acadiana a larger base of experience in which to develop and implement cost savings practices. Additionally, given our size, we can purchase new technology less expensively through arrangements with manufacturers. And finally, given the depth of our resources, we are more efficient at using equipment with more sophisticated maintenance and repair operations that produce less vehicle downtime. In one study, vehicle downtime for public vehicles was estimated at 16% compared to the private sector at 6%. While we strive to be effective and efficient, it is never at the expense of safety. Everything we do is centered around the safe environment for our employees and our customers. At Republic Services, we believe safety to be more than a buzzword. It is non-negotiable.
Thank you. The next set of questions for each of our panelists is, what is the economic impact on the local economy, on local jobs, and on labor conditions? And where do the profits go?
Okay.
Mr. Huval?
Thank you. LUS Fiber has 62 full-time employees working for it. We also have 22 part-time employees, and the annual budget of those two is about $3.9 million. We also contract with companies to help on these installations of new services to customers and these folks hire about 48 local employees, and their annual wage is about $2.5 million. So, from the standpoint of the economic impact, from both an employee perspective and contractor perspective, it does have an impact on the area. And the good thing is that the contractors, for the most part, are hiring local talent. Even though we might be getting contractors from out of state, the reason why we get them those contractors is because they have a lot of experience doing exactly what we need them to do here. A lot of times people will say, well, can't you just hire local people? And we certainly try every way we can to do that. We have public bid process we have to go through sometimes, and that can kind of get in the way of things. But in general, what we'll see happening is that we'll get a contractor that has the management experience of being able to run a project exactly like what we're doing here, because we don't want anybody learning on our dime. We want to make sure we have people that are bona fide and know what they're doing, that can come out here and run an organization. And then they hire the local talent necessary to make that happen. And in our case, of the contractors that are installing fiber services today, probably 90% of them live here in Acadiana. The rest may be coming from out of state and maybe for particular certain levels of expertise that we need, but we really try hard to keep that here. From a standpoint of the profits, well, we're a nonprofit organization. We're owned by the citizens of the city of Lafayette. Any money that we make over and above what it costs us to sell our services goes into reinvestment into the system or the support of the cost of running government within Lafayette, the city of Lafayette. So in our case, because we are set up as a city government organization, that the profits pretty much stay in town and help to support the cost of upgrading our systems and supporting the cost of running the city.
Thank you. Sheriff Nystrom?
Yeah, we have 4 jobs that we hire locally with the commissary. That's part of our privatized services, and we don't have any with the phone, so we only have 4 there. I would like to divert a little bit, though, and talk about what we do in slightly different fashion. And it's using inmates to provide work for the community. I know it's not really privatizing. I'm not exactly sure but it's an attempt to make government more efficient by using inmate labor. And I know that's not specifically the topic, but I want to address that real quick because I think the community benefits as well as making government more efficient in the parish. And I think that's probably one of the purposes of this discussion here is how to make government more efficient, how to use the resources that we have available to us, whether it's through tax dollars or through other means, and this would be through the other means. Where we have inmates, we have a large number of inmates. Our inmate populations, including work release, is a little over 1,000 inmates incarcerated. And the question is, well, what can you do with those inmates to make them more productive and make government more efficient? We have right now 15 crews of about, 25 crews with 5 inmates on each crew. We have several contracts. The city of Lafayette has, I think, 5 crews working. Cairn Crow has a crew, Youngsville. And the purpose of that is to try to make a cost-effective use of inmates. The inmates are given a very minimal wage, and the contracts are based upon the salaries of the security officer who works with the crews. It's been very productive. We keep very detailed records of what's accomplished and how much trash and things that are being cleaned up throughout the parish. So I think it's a positive step. And I think later on when we talk about private prisons and we talk about how can we know if we're being effective, the whole issue of data, which I know this is not the purpose of this conversation, but I think as tax dollars constrict, there's going to be a greater emphasis and attention focused on what are you accomplishing and how are you measuring what you're accomplishing. And that's one of the hang-ups of private prisons, is that when you start talking about measures of effectiveness, the conversation gets a little blurred in terms of, well, are they as effective or as efficient as public prisons or jails? So that's one thing. We have the inmate work crews as an attempt to give more resources to local governments as well as nonprofits. If you follow the conversations locally, there's a great interest in, well, is it the proper role of government to go into helping nonprofits operate? We provide those services to nonprofits at no cost. It could be cutting the grass. It could be Food Net Family. I forget the exact title of the program, but the Food Net program that's around during Christmas time. There's a lot of labor involved. We build a lot of these wheelchair ramps for elderly citizens and senior citizens in the parish. So again, it's an attempt to do things a little differently, but you're using resources that the Sheriff's Office has, and we'll continue to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Guidry?
Well, first on the question relative to profits, we are a for-profit company, as are our competitors. Profits get distributed to shareholders of the company. We have thousands of owners who hold stock individually and through mutual funds. I'm sure we have many shareholders in Acadiana. Anyone who owns stock in the company will receive profits in the form of dividends. It is my hope that we perform at a level to attract people who want to invest in our company. Those investments provide for our ability to keep up with advanced technologies through the purchase of state-of-the-art equipment and allows us to compete for a superior workforce. In every community we serve, we make every effort to hire locals. The obvious reasons are that they are familiar with the area, but also those locals come with a sense of pride in their own communities, and we hope that translates to a desire to provide superior service to their families and friends. I think everyone wants to be associated with the winner, and our employees work hard to win the admiration and respect of our customers. With our local office serving as the headquarters for Southwest Louisiana, Lafayette and the surrounding communities get the added benefit of a support staff needed to operate a regional company. With an approximately weekly payroll of $100,000, the economic impact of our employees alone is significant. Add to that the monthly maintenance cost for trucks and containers at $225,000. Because most of those dollars are spent locally, the economic impact is obvious. But also added to the mix is the direct tax dollars paid to local communities, not only in maintenance type purchases, but also in the purchase of new equipment like trucks. Because tax is different by community, I'll let you do the math. We have 62 trucks with an average cost of $210,000 per truck. Finally, on the issue of local jobs and labor conditions, some voice their concerns when jobs were lost when we moved from a manual collection system to an automated collection system utilizing 90-gallon carts. In reality, those positions were extremely difficult, if not impossible at times, to fill. Many times, especially during times of severe cold or hot weather, the labor force was just not there. The alternative was to go to an automated collection system, which resulted in a positive impact on our workforce. The automated system requires more from the driver than simply driving safely. It has become more of a skill position, and as a result, those drivers command higher wages. Unfortunately, in Acadiana, we have experienced too many injuries and fatalities resulting from the motoring public. With safety as a priority, we want to minimize the time spent by our employees outside of the truck. But working conditions have improved and become safer, and we continue to believe that the automated collection system is the safest and best use of available technology.
Thank you. So our last set of questions for each of you with regard to your privatized services and your private contracts. Who has financial oversight and accountability for the public's dollars, with specific reference, if you can, to budget, borrowing money, and audit?
Concerning LUS Fiber, we're a governmental entity, so therefore the entity that oversees our operations is the City Parish Council, and the subset of the City Parish Council that deals with LUS issues, which is called the Lafayette Public Utilities Authority. So we have this elected body that oversees our budgeting process, oversees our policies on how we serve customers, basically everything that is necessary from the standpoint of having governance that's looking at this public asset. It oversees our system in all those areas. We have an annual audit that's required by the state law. That audit is performed by an independent auditor to make sure that we're abiding by the requirements of state laws. We operate this public entity. When we have to borrow money, that requires the council approval. Every time we issue new bonds, we typically issue tax-exempt revenue bonds. Then all of those bond issues have to go to the council for approval. And of course, those council meetings are public. They're aired on local access stations like AOC. The public has a chance to weigh in on their opinion as to whether we should be taking certain actions or not. And of course, the elected officials are ultimately those that are commissioned by the public to ensure that we're doing the things according to the best interests of the community. Also, we also report to the city parish president, who is also an elected official. He's my boss, and so we have a lot of oversight, a lot of transparency in everything that we do.
Great, thank you.
Sheriff's offices in Louisiana are overseen by the financial operations, by the legislative auditor. There's no other entity above the sheriff that approves or disapproves. I say that with some refinement, but there is if we go out and borrow money like we borrowed money to build the facility on Willow Street, the bond commission has to approve it. The state bond commission has to approve it and review everything. We've just gone through that process. There's a very detailed procedure that has to be followed that's lined up in the state statutes as what you can do and not do. In terms of public oversight, we abide by all the legal statutes in terms of publishing of the budget, having public meetings. If there's an amendment to the budget, we have to have another notification and public meeting, and we've operated under that for quite a long time. The only other way would be public records requests, which we do fulfill occasionally, primarily from the media. If they say, well, we want this and this and this, we want to know what's going on here, and we will abide by that upon request. So it is a little unusual. I will admit that there's no one above the sheriff, and when I first got into office, I was kind of shocked that there was not another entity, but that's the way it is, and I wasn't going to start a crusade to change it. So we've operated fine. Every year the legislative auditor reviews the operations, the financial operations. In terms of accountability, there's other methods and mechanisms that we use. Right now we're accredited by 4 national, maybe 5 national accrediting bodies, which require you to sort of achieve and follow certain requirements. We have the law enforcement area accredited nationally. In fact, we have an on-site in a week and a half where people come in and they look at everything. We have 480 standards that apply to everything from use of force, how you handle your money, how you handle your evidence, transportation, and so forth. So we have the jail accredited also, our training academy accredited, and a couple of others. So we think that we are operating fine. I didn't say this a while ago on the second question, but in terms of the profits, we really don't make any profits on inmate labor. If that money is there, we do make a little money on work release, which is a little different program that we have involved with inmates at the end of their sentence, where they go out and actually work for a private company. The first example I gave was those working for government entities. So, and that money is going into our reserve, and we use to where we can afford to buy this. We bought the property as well as borrow the money to construct a facility with no increased tax revenue. So we feel good about that.
Thank you. Mr. Guidry?
Every successful public-private partnership requires a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the partnering organizations. No one need be concerned that privatization of solid waste services will eliminate government involvement in the management process and put the public at risk. Experience has proven that privatization actually requires an important role for municipal or parish government. I can tell you that from my own personal experience, our local elected officials recognize their role in providing for the safety and welfare of their constituents and take an active role in ensuring that we provide quality services at a reasonable cost. Louisiana law, specifically Title 33, provides the guidance to both public and private parties relative to services provided. The solid waste regulations title in Title 33 actually begin with these words, and I quote, "The Louisiana legislature recognizes that the safety and welfare of citizens require efficient and reasonable regulation of solid waste disposal practices," end quote. Government cannot disengage from its responsibility to protect public health, safety, and the environment. Therefore, the primary responsibility of a city official is to protect the public. In municipalities and parishes where solid waste services have been privatized, officials, both elected and appointed, serve as watchdogs by monitoring performance and enforcing contracts. Officials are the foundation for planning activities directly associated with successful long-term management of solid waste. The job of the private sector is to fulfill the terms of the contract, which has proven to be a quality-assured, cost-effective solution to solid waste services. The investment of capital to purchase collection vehicles, hire staff, and construct facilities is the risk of the private sector acquires to ensure the collection and safe disposal of society's waste. The private sector also plays a vital role in the planning process by providing advice and insight to professional planners. By privatizing, budgeting for services is also much more predictable as contracts are for a fixed amount. The single most important responsibility of waste collection firms is to respect the municipality or parish government as the customer. The goal is to always provide the customer with services that far exceed the highest expectations.
Thank you. And I was wrong. I apologize. I do have one more question for all three of you, if you don't mind. What public transparency or sunshine is there? What criteria or safeguards are in place to protect in cases of default, liability, or poor performance?
Thank you. Your comment reminds me of council members that say they have one last question. It works that way. You know, as a public entity, we're subject to public records laws. And so therefore, if a member of the public wants to receive copies of our budget, of our financials, or anything concerning our business, they have the opportunity to do that within the limits of those laws. In fact, Cox Communications knows that law quite well. They actually have someone on board that every month makes public records requests of our financials, so that so even though they're a fierce competitor of ours, they have insights to our budgeting process and our cost structure that we don't have on them. And that's just a way of the nature of how this business works. We're a governmental entity. We're public. We're open. We're transparent. Public is invited to be part of our budget deliberations with the council. Those are public meetings, and there's a lot of discussion about the various initiatives that we have going on in the fiber system and the utility system in that regard. We also are very visible in the public, you know, by having elected officials who are our board of directors in essence, and the elected official who's our chief executive officer, which is Joy Durrell. The public sees those individuals around the community. They certainly see them at election time. You know, it gives them gives an opportunity for those officials to be held accountable for what it is that we're doing. On our side, on my side, My children say there's hardly any place I can go to in town without somebody stopping me and talking to me about something about the business, and that's fine. That's what we do. If people need to find me, they just look in the phone book, and my number's posted in the phone book. And some customers take advantage of that at 2 o'clock in the morning. But that is the openness that we have, and it's just inherent with the kind of position that we have here. When we deal with issues related to liability and costs and so on that might be incurred, all of our contracts have some very stringent risk management liabilities associated with the contractor, so that the contractor has responsibilities for carrying the appropriate level of insurance, and the contractor has a performance bond that they must make available to us should they not complete the project as required. And the performance bond is for the entire cost of the contract. So when we have had situations, and it's been rare, but when we've had situations where we have to go back on a contractor, we have considerable leverage to be able to ensure that the government's assets are properly accounted for and taken care of. So from the whole, I guess, overall perspective, we're about as public as you can get, and we look at the assets of the government in such a way as to protecting them just as we would if it was our own assets ourselves.
Thank you.
Okay, I kind of answered some of this in the last response, but I think, as Terry said, that we are elected officials. I'm an elected official. Joey Durrell's an elected official, and I think that's a pretty good way of monitoring the performance of the organization or the people below them. It's a phone call away if you have a problem or an issue. Some we can resolve, others are more complicated, maybe take more time. The oversight provided by public information requests is very, I think, clear and very important, and people utilize that to a great extent. So I think I will go back to the accreditation, since we're not really overlooked or managed by any other entity. The accreditation groups and accreditation earnings and achievements, I think, give us that extra external supervision that should be convincing to the public that we're abiding by national standards, whether it's in the jail, whether it's police work, whether it's training of police, that there are standards that have to be met to ensure the public that, granted, there's not another body above the sheriff, but there are these national standards that we have seen fit to pursue and obtain that will ensure the highest quality of service that are provided to the citizens of Lafayette. And that's kind of where we are.
Thank you, Mr.
Since the focus is on privatization, I'd like to repeat what I said earlier. Every successful public-private partnership requires a clear understanding of the roles and responsibilities of the partnering organizations. It is essential that expectations be clear. Again, in addition to each partner understanding its own particular responsibilities, successful public-private relationships have a clear understanding of the roles and expectations of the other party. Solid waste collection can involve an array of different services. Successful privatization requires that government define which of the services should be transferred to the private sector and which of the services they may decide to keep. In Acadiana, we have contracts that call for a variety of service options. Some contracts call for us to pick up solid waste only while the government is picking up yard waste. Other contracts call for us to pick up solid waste, yard waste, and recycling services. So once the service is defined, public officials need to clearly define minimum service levels. This includes such matters as frequency of collection, permitted hours of operation, insurance and bonding requirements, health and safety restrictions, permissible complaint levels, and other basic service parameters. Leaving room for interpretation only leads to confusion and frustration. What public transparency or sunshine is there? The answer is simple. Every municipal and/or parish contract is a public document and available to the public. Every contract between BFI Waste Services and municipal and/or parish governments were signed by the executive branch, which is the mayor or parish president, after first being presented to the governing body at a public meeting for review, input, and approval by that governing body, be it a city council, parish council, or police jury. And to further illustrate my point, the LCG contract is a great example of how public-private partnerships should begin. Only after multiple Public Works Committee meetings with council members and staff along with multiple council meetings, which included PowerPoint presentations and opportunities for public input, the result was a document that best addressed the needs of all parties concerned. And only after receiving an affirmative vote by the majority of the council did Parish President Joy Durrell execute and enter into a contract with my company. On the issue of whether protective criteria or safeguards are in place, I would again point to our current contracts. Every contract clearly defines performance expectations and provides for penalties if those expectations are not met. In my opinion, the Lafayette Consolidated Government contract is the toughest contract in the state in demanding high performance expectations. In addition to the standard penalty clause, based on measurements of service effectiveness rates, the LCG contracts for the penalties that include termination of the contract if performance expectations are not met. I take a great deal of pride in being able to say that our employees not only meet those expectations, we exceed them.
Thank you. And we have one final question for Sheriff Newstrom, and that is, what are the effects or results of privatization on prisons in Louisiana, more statewide?
Yeah, that's a tough question. I'll just kind of give you my thoughts on privatization of prisons as I understand it. And I think that it really depends on your philosophy as an agency head of a criminal justice agency. The Sheriff's Office not only provides law enforcement services, but provides correction services, jails, detention services. And my personal view is that if someone's arrested and they're incarcerated, my job is to try to make sure they don't come back as best we can. Now, some people, that's very difficult to do, behaviorally speaking, or they may come back several times, but it takes a heavy investment in the treatment end of a jail to sort of reap some of those benefits where people won't come back. And I think that the idea of privatization of prisons within the last 5 or 10 years, or the state selling their prisons, has been considered, looked at, evaluated. I'm not intimately familiar with Ohio, but they're kind of looking at going back to the way it was previously. They sold some of their private prisons to, some of their public prisons to private entities, and they put it in their contract, in their clause, that there had to be a certain percentage of savings from one year to the next. And that's kind of back to the data issue we talked about briefly earlier, that I think the critical component in any type of privatization is a performance. What is being required and what is being delivered? What is the service as best you can define it? The problem with jails is it gets a little slippery when you talk about recidivism rates and efficiency of the operation in terms of dollars and cents. So it's not an easy task, but I think if we're going to move in any direction of privatizing prisons, there has to be a clear analysis of what do we expect in terms of recidivism, what do we expect in terms of savings, and hold that entity to that task or that requirement. I think that historically there's been issues with the major companies. The biggest one is CCA, Corrections Corporation of America, which is housed in Nashville, headquartered in Nashville, getting involved in operations of local government sort of on a lobbying basis. And there's been some investigations as to their involvement in terms of moving legislation forward that would create harsher laws to keep people locked up for longer periods of time. To me, the incentives are not the way they should be. My philosophy is, if a person comes in, let's do what we can to make sure that they don't come back. That's recidivism. Private prison companies, they are in the market of a profit-making enterprise. I think there are certain things that governments should remain in, and private prisons is one in particular. So there's a couple of other finer points that those states that have gone to private prisons, there's some efforts by the private prisons to only take those inmates who do not pose a serious health threat or have serious medical problems, which they call that cherry picking. They only want the healthier inmates, as well as those inmates that are not sort of mentally ill or have other types of problems, addiction problems. those are the cheaper inmates to administer and to treat and to house. So they only have those types of in their facilities. And the other thing that causes problems is historically they have paid less money to their employees and have provided less training for their employees, which results in a potential problem with public safety. If you're constantly mishandling a situation inside of a jail, you're dealing with very difficult people, very difficult situations, addiction, mentally ill people in a facility, and that's a whole nother area that we could talk about for a long time. The jails have become the de facto mental health facilities in the country because of the deinstitutionalization of mental health facilities about 30, 40 years ago. So we have a lot of mentally ill people in our facility. We have a lot of people that are medicated in our facility. The private prisons do not want those types of inmates. They want the state to maintain those which are considered high-cost inmates. So I know it's viewed as sort of a cost savings, an efficiency move. I think it's a threat to public safety, and it's not a cost savings to the taxpayer. I think there are certain things that have to be done by government, and providing incarceration and correctional services is one of those things.
Thank you, that's helpful. Now, we'd like to open it up to questions from the audience. We can take 1-minute questions, and we can have, if you oblige, 1-minute responses from our panelists. And if you don't mind, come up to the mic to pose your questions.
I'm Thetis Cusumano, member of the League of Women Voters, and you've talked a lot about performance standards and accrediting agencies and the importance of elected officials in the public role. What is we of the public? What is our role in regard to those specifics? What would you suggest to us? We're a big audience here, we're big voices.
Well, I think this is the beginning. I think you're more involved. You invited people to come talk about topics and issues that are related to the public, and I think this is a good first step. I would say get more involved when there are public meetings, public hearings. We have an accreditation meeting, a public forum in about 10 days. They come in on a Saturday. They come in on the 14th, leave on the 16th. There's a public forum. If you want to come talk about what the sheriff's office is doing right and what the sheriff's office is not doing right, or you have some issues with, that would be a way to do it. If you have issues with our finances, we have, again, an annual audit that we provide. Come to some of those public hearings there. If you have an issue with some method that we've used to handle a case, do an investigation, there's public information opportunities there to do that. Those are some of my suggestions. The performance thing gets a little trickier because the whole thrust is how are you measuring what government does, and I think that the future is going to be based on what's called evidence-based practices. I'm involved with a juvenile detention facility that's in Branch, that's called Acadiana Marine Institute, AMI Kids, and they're going through the future of crime prevention and crime control is to simply measure what you're doing as best you can. There is some slippage there because of some of the areas that you're trying to measure are not crystal clear, but I think the future is going to open the door for some of that to be developed.
Anybody else?
Concerning Lafayette Consolidated Government, there's public council meetings 3 times a month. There's one particular meeting that's actually where it's reserved a time slot for people in the community to come up and express their concerns about anything. Normally at the council meetings, the structure of it is set up as that there's an ordinance or a resolution that needs to be voted on by the council. Then there's an opportunity for the public to be able to sign up in advance and to make comments or concerning that particular item that's up for consideration. But there is one meeting of the month, I think it's the second meeting of the month, that where the public, there's actually a public comment period, and the public can speak about anything other than what's on the agenda, as a matter of fact. If they want to speak on something that's on the agenda, then they wait till that item comes up and they have a chance to speak on that item. But there's actually an open session there that's not time limited other than on a person-by-person basis. If there's 20 people that want to speak, then there's going to be 20 people that get an opportunity to speak during that particular part of the council meeting.
One suggestion I would have would be to be informed. I think this group certainly is ahead of the curve, and that's why we're here today. But you know, I talked earlier about understanding expectations. Both parties, private and public parties, need to understand the expectations of everybody involved. I think if the public understands the expectations and what's expected of us as a service company and what services are provided, and I'll give you an example. One of the things that makes it really difficult is to be able to communicate to and allow those communications to filter down to the public. I think the sheriff's going to tell you that ignorance of the law is no excuse, and it kind of falls true with some of the services that are provided to the public. A good example is when we converted from manual collection system to an automated collection system. One of the driving forces behind that was compliance issues. I can tell you the vast majority of the people of Lafayette did not comply with what was required by the solid waste ordinance, which meant that solid waste had to be containerized in a container that was 35 gallons or less with a lid. If that would happen, I don't think we would have had any problems, but people kept going to a larger and larger container and basically drove to the point where the 90-gallon carts made more sense. But it's a matter of just getting involved and becoming informed, if the public becomes informed.
Thank you. Any other questions?
Welcome, panel. I'm glad that you were here. My name is Bobby Dunn. I'm with the League of Women Voters, and my question is really for you, Sheriff Newsom. You said that one of your main focuses on is getting people that are inmates that are won't come back to prison. What are some of the things that you're doing in the prisons that are correcting this problem and letting them to get out and not come back?
Well, we have what's called we have all the normal traditional treatment programs, AA, NA. Drug treatment programs. We have a 6-month in-house rehab program, which we find is very effective. We think a short-term drug treatment program, 30 days, is not effective. So we've gone to a 6-month program. It's very expensive. We operate it with funding from the state. We think that's very good. The most recent one is called FFT, Functional Family Therapy, which is one of those things we talked about last time about measuring what you're doing in terms of treatment. But functional family therapy, the key is the family. And if you're dealing with juveniles or young adults, it's very clear that those people come from an environment that had been problematic coming up, and it's an attempt by specially trained people, most of them social workers, master's level social workers, to work with the family, mom and daddy, whoever's available, with other children in the family, but it's an intensive treatment program over a long period of time to try to turn that person around. We think that's the most effective. It's evidence-based, means it's been looked at historically in terms of what's being done, are the people being changed, their behavior being changed, is it having a positive effect on the family, the interaction of family members, as well as the legal aspects of the person who is violating the law. But we think that's the future, evidence-based, where you can show people what's effective and what's not effective. But again, it's a very expensive thing. Traditionally, it's not been done because the philosophy has been in the past, we're not worried about treatment. I think that's not a very good way to look at things when you say we're gonna put people in jail, they do their time. There is a sanction component, there is a punishment component. I understand that. They have to do what the courts have said they have to do. But my point, and kind of directly to your question just now, was I think we have to do something differently when we have a chance while they're incarcerated to turn it around. And those are just a couple of things that come to mind.
Do we have time for another question?
Good afternoon, panel. My name is Veronica Williams, and my question has to do with technology in the digital age and whether a service is public to private or private to public. Do you find in your positions is driven, the decision whether to privatize it or make it public is driven by technology, the digital age? Because I know we have LUS Fiber, we deal with smart meters. He talked about the sheriff talked about the telephone system, automated garbage services. So that's my question as to whether or not it's public or privately driven based on technology?
As I'll start off with the response to that on our side is that, we recognize that technology is a tool that can help us provide better services at a lower cost or better services at the same cost. And so we're always looking for, whether it's a power plant or a water plant or a sewer plant or the telecommunications system, to look at ways that we can do that. If it turns out that the technology is available, it's something that we can pick up from our own organization with the skill set that we have and based on the priorities we have ahead of us, and that's what we do. But there are some times where it makes a lot more sense for us to contract with an entity that's an expert in one particular slice of technology that might be either cutting edge or requires a lot of training and a lot of backup for us to outsource that. We look at that on a case-by-case basis. Most of the time, all that work is done internally, but we do have those circumstances where the financial and the operational benefits are such that contracting that out makes a lot more sense. But our preference is always to do it internally if it is something that we expect to do on a long-term basis, and to contract out if we feel that it's something that we need specific expertise.
Yeah, I think that I would agree with Terry that if you have the internal expertise, which sometimes you do and sometimes you don't, then stay inside. We're looking right now very closely. We have it set up with video. We have video visitation now where an inmate who wants to have a visit by their family member, this is someone who's incarcerated, not in treatment necessarily, but they go to J. Wallace James, the old school we've leased from the school board, and they sit in front of a TV. They're there, and then the inmate's in his jail area up in the main jail, and they communicate. Well, the next step, and that's what we contract. We contract that portion, and we've had numerous problems with it. But right now, we're trying to interact that with a video visitation to the home, which not a lot of people do. And there's some problems, potential problems, but we're analyzing all of that. So that would be a software cost, a ramp-up cost initially, and then maintenance and so forth over time. That would be something we would have to look at, but we're evaluating that as we go. And the other use of that is inmates now, when they have a visit by an attorney, you have to provide visitation rights to attorney in the jail. That technology can be used, and we've implemented that on a small level with numerous attorneys in Lafayette who do criminal defense work. So they don't have to come to the jail. They can talk to their clients easier, more readily, more conveniently, and hopefully expedite the case to get it to trial and get it handled properly.
And Sheriff, I don't want to make this a commercial, but I know the Sheriff's Department buys the LUS Fiber services, and the idea of having that type of communications you're speaking of between the home and the facility is something we can certainly help you with.
Okay.
And we'll be happy for you to privatize that with us.
It's a good idea. Good.
Mr. Guidry?
Thank you for the question. It was a great question because I'm sure you're thinking garbage service in a digital age. We are a highly regulated, highly specialized industry, and like most people, when I first got involved in it, I thought you just pushed it at the curb and didn't worry about it. But it takes quite a bit more. In order for us to continue to be competitive, and I'm going to tell you, this is a very competitive business because there's always someone out there, like most businesses, that can do it better for less. We have to embrace technology. We have to embrace what's coming out there, and we have to continually look to improve our services. I can tell you on the technology end and the digitized digital age end, we actually have carts right now that we service that have computer chips in it that allow us to identify those carts when those carts are serviced, which helps us both from a customer standpoint and from an operational standpoint, so that we know we can track exactly what time that cart was serviced, and we know whether the driver said he serviced it or she serviced it, and the customer said he didn't, we know exactly what took place because that computer chip would tell us. So we embrace new technology, and we make every effort to make sure that we keep up with it.
Thank you. Do we have time?
We have 2 minutes.
The very quick question, a very quick answer?
Oh, very easy question. My name is Marjorie Donlin, and I visit 12 prisons a week. We're Toastmasters. And we try to help these guys because we know them by name and everything else. My question is, I thought we were going to be talking about privatization of prisoners. And I know, and you can get after me if you want, that there is going on in these prisons. People don't want to keep them there because these prisoners bring in a lot of money. It's a lot more trouble to let them go out and get new ones in. That's my question. I know, and this, you talk this stuff.
Say it again, what's the question?
I'm a Toastmaster.
Okay, but
and
the
I
question
go into 12 different prisons,
right,
very closely associated with these men. Some of them boys, when they went in there for dope and then got 10 years, they're coming out when they're 27, 28 years old. Yes, the prisons do a lot to help them. They learn how to be carpenters and all kinds of things like that. My question is, are we talking about privatization of prisons or what? What are we talking about here?
Well, the topic of privatization of prisons has been discussed locally and statewide recently because the governor said he's looking at that possibility. There's been no commitment by the, but your question is, are there the motives maybe askew?
Perhaps we can address
Maybe
it
I should
after.
take a quicker question, not go faster.
We're actually out of time. I'm so sorry.
Well,
I'm so
if we're
sorry.
not on film, that's okay. But I just want to know, are we gonna
I will just have to,
say
on
about
film, thank, excuse me, I'm so sorry.
We're off.
The League of the League of Women Voters of Lafayette thanks you very, very much. We have here Terry Huval from Lafayette Utility Services, Sheriff Mike Newstrom, and Bobby Guidry from Allied Waste Management. Thank you so much.